Fire took her right on the Harlem pavement. They torched Bumpy Johnson's little girl. But that heat, it was a matchstick compared to the hell brewing on the streets. The blood didn't write this chapter. It was the quiet, the devastating calm that came after the scream. That split second sealed the neighborhood's fate. A slow burn started right then, incinerating whatever scrap of mercy was left in town. We aren't talking about messy street justice. We are talking about the cold, hard fallout that changes a man's life forever. Payback was the small picture. This was about the code, about a system that forgot the price of disrespecting a boss. Bumpy didn't reach for a Tommy gun. He reached for something deadlier. The clock, 24 hours flat. That is the deadline. By the time the hand circles round, every soul on the block is going to see a new kingpin rise. It wasn't built on hot blood. It was built on ice. The kind of discipline that leaves a mark on history. The kind that grabs the world by the throat. If you respect the hustle, smash that like button and subscribe. Keep these old war stories alive. Drop a word below. What time is it on your watch? Where are you posted up? The neighborhood went dead silent. They had seen hits, raids, the ugly side of the business. But they never saw a boss this calm. That wasn't fear. That was a boss making a move. Bumpy Johnson, the heavy hitter, wasn't screaming for heads on a platter. He wasn't tearing up the asphalt looking for blood. No, what went down in those dark hours was way scarier. Harlem pavement is stained with violence, but the loudmouths don't run things. It is the guys in the back room, watching, waiting, figuring the angles. They knew when to make a play and when to keep their mouths shut. They knew real power ain't the guy yelling. It is the subtle shift, the blade you never see coming. You cross a guy like Bumpy, the hit doesn't matter. It is how he settles the score that counts. You never lose your cool. Nobody said a word, but everybody knew they just watched the fuse get lit. The disrespect, someone crossed a line you just don't cross. They saw what happened to Bumpy's blood. It hurt to watch, but they knew to stay out of the way. The payback wasn't going to be messy. It was going to be surgical. Strictly business, cold as ice. The scariest guy in the room is the one who doesn't blink and lets the clock do the heavy lifting. They say Harlem changed that night. The air got heavy. The streets were buzzing, but nobody was talking above a murmur. Nah. This was the word passing through the pavement cracks, reading between the lines. It was in the eyes when they thought the law wasn't looking, a feeling that the end was coming, no matter what. Time felt like a countdown, even if nobody spoke it. Everybody knew the bill was coming due. Nobody lifted a finger to stop it. They stayed quiet because they knew Judgment Day wasn't going to be a riot. It was coming calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying. As time ticked on, the question hanging in the cigar smoke was, when does this whole house of cards come down? In the alleys, they waited. Tick-tock. Harlem was bracing for a storm that would wipe the slate clean. Driven not by temper, but by pure control. 24 hours. That was the hard line. It hung there like a loaded gun, the weight of it pressing down on every shoulder in the borough. For Bumpy, time was his partner. He didn't need a knee-jerk reaction. He didn't need to swing wild. He just needed patience. In 24 hours, the territory changes. But first, he had to set the board. Bumpy knew that settling the score, when done right, is more than just getting even. It becomes a reputation, a legacy. It draws a line in the sand that nobody crosses for years. Torching his daughter? That was personal. But the payback? That was business, targeting more than just the mooks who did it. It targeted the whole organization that made them feel safe. Behind the door, the sit-down began. No yelling, no showboating for an audience. The wise guys in that room knew the score. Chaos doesn't run the world. Order does. Every decision was weighed. Every move was calculated. set up so when the hammer dropped, the message was loud and clear. Step 1 was logistics. Who gets the call? What muscle do we need on the ground? Bumpy knew the territory. He knew the players. He knew the heartbeat of Harlem better than his own. The neighborhood had a part to play, even if they kept quiet. The crew knew Harlem breathed like a living beast, a power you could use if you knew how. There was a brief pause, but it wasn't fear. Every guy in that room knew the price tag attached to this job. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about the whole structure, respect, muscle, and absolute control. And once you tip those scales, there ain't no turning back. The setup came together quiet-like, a whisper here, a handshake there. But every move had one purpose, to hit 'em where they bleed, right when all eyes are locked on the stage. They wouldn't see the knife coming until it was buried deep. As the clock ticked down, nobody asked times if times the blowback was coming. The only question was times when asterisk, and the answer was simple. The second the ink dried behind closed doors, Bumpy Johnson and his top lieutenants huddled in the shadows, the air heavy enough to choke on. The table was covered in papers, maps, and markers, every move plotted like a chess game. The silence in that room carried the weight of a death sentence. In that quiet, the crown was already shifting. They weren't talking about the past no more. They were writing the future. This wasn't petty payback. It was about sending a message loud enough to shake the pavement. Bumpy's head wasn't hot with rage. There was no fire in his eyes, just cold, hard calculation. He knew if he went off half-cocked, the point would be missed. But if he waited, let the pressure cook, let those rats sweat in their own paranoia, then the city would fall into his lap. This wasn't about one crew. It was about proving that the laws of the street could be rewritten, that the chain of command, that silence they relied on, could be snapped. Nobody stands above the code of respect, and nobody outruns the debt of their own ego. But this wasn't a simple hit. Every step had to be razor sharp, every nod, every favor had to land on the beat. Harlem had to fall in line, whether the streets knew it or not. The punks who lit the match weren't the real target. No, Bumpy was aiming higher at the machine that made him think they were bulletproof. He was planting dynamite under their whole foundation. One by one, the names hit the table. Guys who thought they were gods were getting marked for death. Bumpy's soldiers, the ghosts in the alleyways, would make sure the stage was set, nothing slipped through the cracks. The whole operation would crumble brick by brick until it was dust. Now, we just watched the clock. Bumpy scanned the room, locking eyes with his right-hand man. A single nod was all that passed between them. That's the language of men who've buried bodies together for years. They knew exactly what was on the line. They knew the whole world was about to tune in, even if they didn't know it yet. The crown had already changed heads. All that remained was pulling the trigger. The tension was thick, a wire pulled tight enough to snap a neck. But Bumpy, he was stone. He wouldn't twitch a muscle until the stars aligned. The pieces were sliding on invisible strings, dragging the neighborhood right where he wanted it. And when the hammer dropped, it wouldn't just bury one crew. It would crush the whole damn system that let this mess happen. Midnight. The city was out cold. But the streets of Harlem? They were wide awake, holding their breath. A silent pressure filled the blocks, thicker than the fog rolling off the Hudson River. Inside that cramped, smoke-choked back room, the outside world felt 1,000,000 miles away. Time stood dead still, every second, dragging like lead weights. But it wasn't the clock making the air heavy. It was knowing that every action has a reaction. They weren't moving in the dark anymore. The hit they planned was going to send shockwaves through every soul in the neighborhood, not just the torchmen. The hierarchy of fear, that delicate house of cards, was about to collapse. And there ain't no fixing it once it falls. In Harlem, power ain't held by just one boss. It's held by the folks who keep their heads down, the ones who look the other way, the ones who keep their traps shut. Every handshake, every nod, every side eye, it all meant business. It was a spider web of favors, a silent pact to keep the machine running, to go blind when necessary. And nobody read that book better than Bumpy. But that web had cracks now, fractures that split open the second they struck Bumpy's own blood. The silence on the street, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. It was like watching a building burn. Everyone standing back, waiting for the roof to cave in. We don't do speeches in Harlem, no hollering, no picket signs. The quiet always spoke the loudest here. And as the minutes bled out into hours, that silence was screaming. Bumpy sat in his throne, eyes glued to the map, tracing the warpath with his gaze. He wasn't sweating it, not yet. But something else was in the room, something deadlier than fear. It was the weight of fate. He knew in his gut that once the first domino tipped, the game was locked in. How long before the streets woke up? Would they see the crown had shifted, or keep sleepwalking into the storm they helped brew? By the time the first heater barked, it would already be over. Harlem didn't belong to the system no more. It was Bumpy's town now, and the takeover would happen before they even understood why. As the clock hands dragged toward sunrise, a cold truth settled over the city. The bill for their disrespect had finally come due. The first hit didn't scream. It whispered. No marching bands, no messy shootouts in the street. Just one cold, calculated move that tipped the first domino. Before the sun hit the pavement, Harlem shifted, but not with a bang. It was a slow, crushing squeeze. The air in the room got heavy, like lead. The blocks felt like a powder keg waiting for a match. Those punks who crossed Bumpy, they were getting iced out, piece by piece. Bumpy didn't just have rats in the walls. He was pulling the foundation out from under their whole operation. Every shop, every corner hustle, every backroom deal got compromised. He peeled them back like an onion until their throat was exposed. Suddenly, the untouchables looked real breakable. The locals, the ones who usually kept their mouths shut, they started to see the writing on the wall. The old rules of the street, they didn't mean squat anymore. The game was rigged differently now. You could feel the pressure dropping like a hurricane coming in, but nobody knew how bad it would get. They didn't see the strings Bumpy was pulling, or how deep the knife was already twisted. The reaction wasn't loud. It was in the eyes. Folks started walking these blocks with a straight back and a heavy step. Guys who used to shake in their boots were looking up now. They kept their traps shut, but they smelled blood in the water. They felt the grip loosening on that rival crew. But the juice wasn't just flowing to Bumpy Johnson. It was flowing back to the neighborhood. Bumpy figured out the one thing the other bosses missed. The real muscle of Harlem wasn't the guys with the guns. It was the people on the stoops. You move them, you move the world. You could steer them toward a new king. But they had to see the throne topple with their own eyes first. When those wise guys realized the floor was crumbling, their tough guy act started to crack. The sweat started pouring. Real slow. Then all at once when they saw the trap shut. They thought Bumpy was soft. Big mistake. They thought they were made of steel, that their racket was bulletproof. But they forgot one simple rule of the jungle. They didn't run Harlem. Harlem ran them. And as Bumpy sat back, watching his machine dismantle them gear by gear, he didn't smile. He just sat in cold silence. The checkmate was on the board. No Hail Marys this time. No miracles coming to save their necks. It was done. Makes you wonder, did they ever really hold the reins? Or were they just warming the seat until a real boss showed up? The storm broke, and the city breathed different. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, heavy respect. The rivals were history, buried under their own big mouths. Their whole setup caved in on itself. But what fills the empty chair at the head of the table? A vacuum? Nah, something heavier. A new law, one built on keeping your cool, not spraying bullets. When the smoke cleared, Harlem stood still as a grave. People went back to work. But the concrete felt different under their feet. The patience of the wise guys who waited. That was part of the sidewalk now. Nobody forgot the lesson. But nobody ran their mouth about it, neither. That is the Harlem Code. Just a look in the eye, a nod across the bar. But one thing hung in the air like cigar smoke. A cold, hard fact. Disrespect sends a bill, and everyone pays eventually. That was the takeout from this silent war. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about the big picture. A universal law. Crowns fall. Rules get rewritten. Usually when the boss is looking the other way. Years later, that night became a ghost story. Some whispered it like a fairy tale. The real ones just nodded, knowing who really held the keys. A new kingdom was built. But nobody shouted about it because the violence wasn't the point. It was the discipline. As time rolled on, one question stuck in the heads of the survivors. How often did the world change while they blinked? A silent coup happening right under their noses. How many times did the throne change hands without a single trigger pulled? And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the gun that lost that night. It was the foolish idea that a bullet is the only way to run a city.